Huge news for Victoria 3 today, as the developers announce more changes coming to the game, and answer the mystery around patch 1.2, a big, open beta answer. More on that in a little bit though, as well as of course discussing the economic reforms that are coming to Victoria 3. Big changes for an economic simulator. So sit back, relax, subscribe, get yourself comfy, and enjoy. And the gameplay in the background, by the way, is modded gameplay, a what-if scenario, called the Victoria 3 Divergences mod. I made a video about it on the channel, you can check it out. Today though, we want to talk about patch 1.2 that's coming to Victoria 3, the big update. Last week, if you missed my video, a little quick catch up, they told us all about autonomous investment. And as you can see on screen, and I'll put some more information up if you'd like to pause and catch up, the extra for experts, basically this is about how the game distributes the private investment pool. The game and the populations within it, whether they're artisans or capitalists, will earn a little bit of money and put it into buildings privately, building them and upgrading them themselves outside of what you, the player, would control. There'll be a queue, a private queue and a government queue, with government constructions being anything that you make, while private constructions being anything that the populations themselves are building. And the capacity and the amount at which the queues are diverging or being focused on will depend on the kind of nation you're building and the laws that you're building. And that's where today's update comes in. But firstly, I want to address patch 1.2 and really just rip the band-aid off this juicy information. Right at the end of the developer's diary, as you can see on screen, they say, okay, great, all of the changes, all of the updates, all the bug fixes that are coming, when can I actually get my grubby little hands on it? And they say that this time, they'll be doing an open beta. Patch 1.2 will be launching in an open beta. The reason that they give is that it'll be a fairly significant patch. They are literally reforming the economics that underpins Victoria 3 as a grand strategy economic simulator when they mess with those laws around the economy and who can make, spend, and generate cash in the game, i.e. those private investments. Things could get a little bit messy. We expect to get a bird's eye overview of patch 1.2 next week, so do stay tuned for that. This week instead they wanted to drill into the second big change that'll be coming alongside that private autonomous investment that'll be taking place in Victoria 3, a private economy to go alongside the one that you're running. And here, fittingly, they're addressing the actual economic systems themselves. Here they're trying, or at least their ambition, is to increase the difference in gameplay between different economic systems. A command economy, for example, should feel very different to a completely open economy. And more than just the feeling, actually that should play out in the game. Not only should these economies be slightly more difficult to create, but also they should provide more nuance to us as players, right? I want to actually feel a difference in how this economy is running. And that's what this patch update aims to do by addressing the laws. So the easiest way to do it is probably to look at them one at a time and quickly go over how they'll be changing and why that might change an average game of Victoria 3. Here I'm going to do a little side-by-side. Let me know if this works. I know it won't work for everybody, but hopefully, generally, this is a format that's received well. Here you can see changes to traditionalism, that pre-industrial system, little central control. This one remains relatively the same in design, a very backward system. Here, though, the investment pool isn't disabled anymore, although you will take a huge penalty on your investment efficiency, and the type of buildings that you can create are a little bit limited. Next up is Interventionism, generally known as the sort of golden middle-of-the-road option, and it hasn't really extensively been changed in patch 1.2 either, providing no particular bonuses or penalties, giving you the ability, as you can see, to subsidize all buildings as well as extensive options for the investment pool itself. It provides a balanced allocation between private and government. And also, as a little reminder, I'd invite you to take note to the things that you're seeing on screen. In particular, funds in the investment pool and what they can be used for. Under interventionism, you can use them, or they will use them for a lot of things, whereas traditionalism, for example, you can see only really has agriculture, plantations, and ranches. So there are lots of different factors at play here, not just the one or two things that I might be discussing. Let's move through into one that has received a fairly substantial buff, actually, and that is Agrarianism in patch 1.2. Bet you never thought you'd hear somebody so excited about agrarianism. Here, of course, farmers are now an investing pop type in patch 1.2, thanks to the changes we talked about last week. They also, as you can see on screen, will get a hefty bonus to the efficiency of their rural investments. And capitalists also join them in investing here under the agrarian economic system, although it's important to note that they suffer a penalty and their building selection is fairly limited. Overall, though, an interesting one. I would again invite you to take a look at the funds and the investment pool can be used for XYZ. You can see a fairly wide variety of things. And also, important to note, the requirements for these as well are listed here. This one, of course, requiring that anarchy is not the distribution of power. Before moving on to the new economic law that they're introducing, a new system, let's talk about this one here. Of course, the hand of the free market itself. And living up to its reputation here, we'll be able to get the absolute most out of the investment pool. As you can see, really leaning in to the private construction allocation, up 75%. Yeesh! Of course, the downside, the significant drawback most of all, is that it's no longer possible to downsize non-government buildings, those private buildings, under this economic system. So the trade-off for getting the most out of the private sector is that you'll have far fewer controls over it. Of course, in all the glory that the liberal economic model fosters. Now let's move on to what is a very different model, the cooperative ownership model, the new system in Victoria 3's patch 1.2. And with private construction allocation under half that of its predecessor, let's take a look at cooperative ownership. And we may as well just put it up there on screen because, as I say, it's brand new. A new economic law being introduced in patch 1.2 instead of it being just unlocked by becoming a council republic. Under the cooperative ownership, all populations working in a building receive an equal number of shares, and crucially, the aristocrat and capitalist jobs are eliminated. It should lead, they say, to a higher standard of living across the workforce, but it also means far less money in the investment pool overall, as farmers and shopkeepers, those who you can see are contributing, tend to invest far less than their wealthier counterparts in other systems. Speaking of other systems, actually, let's get our cooperative ownership out of the way and move on to the final one, the command economy. The most significant, largest, and most needed overhaul coming in patch 1.2. Instead of being a frankly weird system where bureaucrats own the profits, but you, I, as players, are required to subsidise them, the command economy now makes use of a system called government shares, which is used by the government-run ownership production method. You can see it's unlocked a new production method inside of the command economy economic system. Just like how pop shares entitle populations to a portion of a building's income, dividends, government shares ensure that buildings pay some or all of their profits directly to you and I as players into the treasury of the economy. Large economies are subject to a modifier, with some of the money being wasted due to inefficiencies in an inherently sort of large, heavily centralized system. And this is not something that they have currently set up in the base game. Government shares can also be freely mixed with pop shares. They note that they're looking forward to seeing what modders might be able to do with that last part. And that brings us to the end of the overall changes to the government systems and the new economic system, I should say, that they're introducing in patch 1.2. However, there are a couple of other things to note. Crucially, why and what next? I think just briefly on the why factor, it's important to note that these changes, as they say, are designed to make each system feel a little bit different, provide more nuance to how you might play it, and also I think they'll probably inherently be tied to different nations. You can probably think of ones that you might try and go for a command economy playthrough in over others, for example. But more importantly, as they note in the developer's diary, they actually give a fairly reasonable anecdote, which I guess is trying to prove their point. Seizing the means of production is no longer a one-step reform into council republic, but rather a multi-step reform that comes first by implementing that, then cooperative ownership, and finally branching off into anarchism if you desire. The command economy also requires autocracy or oligarchy. It's difficult to pull everything together in a centralized power. Finally, the real juicy stuff here at the end of the video, and we've touched on it a little bit already. Patch 1.2, when, where, how, why. We've already covered the two big main things that they've discussed already: autonomous investment and, of course, the changes to the economic systems. The when is to be determined, but what we do know is that this patch will be tricky. They are releasing it, as I mentioned earlier, in an open beta, which they say they'll talk about in next week's Developer's Diary. So a week from the time that you're watching this video, if you, like many other people, are watching it on the first day that it released. You'd be surprised how many people watch these kinds of videos on the first day compared to the rest. It's crazy. They go on to say that in there they'll focus a little bit more generally on patch 1.2, giving us a bird's eye view overhaul of sort of what will be included rather than the deep dives like we've already had on the key features, alongside giving us that crucial expected release date. Until then, everybody, I will see you, if not before, next week for that update. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.